Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalam ala Sayyidil Anbiya wal Mursaleen. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una. وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay, do we send that thing? Okay, so it says والبدل وهو أربعة أقسام. And so we mentioned what is the key difference then between the badal and the atf bayan, right? So my friend Lanart is here. Did you mean you're talking about your friend and you are just saying Lanart as an extra thing, or are you saying my friend Lanart is here? So if Lanart is the maqsood, right? That's what it said here, right? It said التابع المقصود بالنسبة. So his being here, are you talking about Lanart or are you talking about my friend? So if Lanart is just there, something extra, we call that atf bayan. But if the maqsood is Lanart and my friend is just a tawti'ah, just an introduction, then it's badal. Okay? So وهو أربعة بدل كل من كل, like my friend Lanat is here, نحو اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم, right? وبدل بعض من كل نحو ولله على الناس حج البيت من استطاع, whoever of them can. So on all people, meaning whoever can, right? وبدل اشتمال نحو يسألونك عن الشهر, like أحب لنارت أسئلته, right? So there is, I cannot cut you up into different pieces and say this is your questions and this is your contribution to the class and this is your presence and this is your this, your this. You can't do that. That doesn't make any sense. It's not something you can cut up. So if it's something that if it's physically cut, you can cut it up, then we call it ba'd min kull. But it's something else. It's like your presence, your commitment, your this, your that, these things, different things about you, your heritage, your past in Singapore, right? And so these aspects of you, we call that. So when you refer to this aspect of somebody after referring to that person, you call that badal ishtimal. From ishtamal alayhi, it's inclusive, right? So they ask you about the sacred months, qitalin fi, for example, fighting in them, right? استفدت منه استفدت من لنارت علمه أو علمه عفوا, right? وبدل الغلط نحو رأيت زيدا الفرس, right? That's just أردت أن تقول الفرس فغلطت فذكرت زيدا عوضا in place of الفرس ثم أبدلت الفرس منه, right? Okay, then we went on to these things as well. And we spoke last week about maf'ul here, remember now? And we spoke about some theological issues. Right? We said, for example, when you say خلق السماوات والأرض, do you say السماوات والأرض, is that the object of the verb or is it the action itself? Right? So that we spoke about those two differences, right? Because sometimes an object, if you say the object was there, you're assuming that so if you say it's the object, the thing that the verb happened to, you're assuming that the thing was there to begin with. What if the thing didn't exist to begin with? Right? So we spoke about that, and we also will look through these pronouns. خير. الثاني المفعول مطلق. So this word مطلق is a bit of an annoying word, right? We use it in fiqh, right? We say الماء المطلق, المجتهد المطلق, right? المفعول المطلق. It means just, right? So here is Lanart, he's the fa'il. Okay, here is the cake, that's the maf'ul bihi. Here is the eating, that's the maf'ul, the thing that it does. So المفعول والفعل is the same thing, right? هذا هو الفاعل, هذا هو المفعول به, the thing that the action happened to, but the fi'l and the maf'ul, they're the same thing. The thing that was done itself. That's maf'ul mutlaq, the thing that was done itself. Okay, so it seems a bit of a silly word because there's always a thing that was done, right? So like, what's the difference between saying, for example, mata zaydun and mata motan? Like, whenever you die, you always do dying. So what's the point of it then? Right? What's the point? So the point is, we mention it in order to emphasize or explain. That's what we do, right? So mata Zaydun, okay. Of course he died. And then you say mata motan. It's like, well, what you mean is he actually died. That's what we translate it, right? Even the word actually, right? I actually acted. Okay, well, how can you not actually act? All acts are actual, aren't they? Right?
Sheikh,
Like
is this something similar to the English, he died a gruesome death?
exactly, he died a gruesome death. So then so how could you not die a death? You know? Like whenever you die, there's a death happening. So what's the point of saying a death? Well, grammatically and linguistically, the point of saying death was so that I could qualify it. That's why, right? That's the point. So that's what we do in Arabic. You either emphasize, meaning, so in things like actually, really, right? So you say things like ضربته ضربا, meaning I really struck him, or ضربته ضربا لطيفا, I struck him gently, right? Or ضربته ضربتين, I struck him twice, right? That's the whole point, right? Now, so maf'ul mutlaq is easy when you see the word itself. It's easy. It's not a problem. It's very easy to deal with. ضربته ضربا, easy. ضربته ضربتين, easy. Right? It's easy to identify. The problem is, the problem is, it's often implied or hidden. Okay? So there's two things that we'll do. A, we will hide the verbal noun itself and just mention its description. So for example, أراك رؤية كثيرة. I see you a seeing that is many. So then I say أراك كثيرا. So كثيرا, how is that a مفعول مطلق? It's not a verbal noun. What it means is أراك رؤية كثيرة. I dropped the word رؤية and I just left its description. So it just has كثير. That's it. So, right? But the issue is it's describing what happened, not what the thing happened to, right? So, آكل كثيرا, does that mean, am I describing the object? Like I eat something that is a lot? Or are you talking about the action is a lot? Does that make sense? So آكل كثيرا, that could mean I eat a lot of things, or I eat frequently. I eat an eating that is done a lot, right? And so if it's the object, that's one thing. If it's a maf'ul mutlaq, it's something else. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Um, and then what else? So that's one thing. The other thing then is I might describe it by using another word, right? So this is really awkward. So I say, for example, um, I have property in Holland. I'm going to visit and I'm going to go there and I'm going to make Lennart my representative. Okay? So now he's going to sign something on my behalf. Okay? So I say وقع لنرت توقيعا كان نيابة عني. Right? So he signed an act of signing that was an act of taking my place, or that was an act of representing me. Okay? وقع توقيعا, he signed an act of signing كان نيابة عني. Right? That act of signing was the act of signing was an act of standing in my stead, of doing something for me. So now I just keep it brief. I say وقع نيابة عني. He signed for me. He signed in my place. So now you're looking at word niyabatan. You say niyabatan, niyabatan, niyabatan. Like, what's that? And I say maf'ul mutlaq, and you say habibi. How on earth is that maf'ul mutlaq? It's not the verb. I say yes, but in this situation, the maf'ul, the fi'l, was an act of niyaba, was an act of standing in someone's stead, was an act of representing somebody. So it makes sense here. So that's very confusing because it's not even a word that's like it. It's just a word that It's just like a word. So sometimes they'll describe it as hal min al masdar, right? But it's basically the same thing. Hal min al masdar, right? That will be like, and it's used very frequently. It's used in normal speech. It's all over the place. Does that make sense? So that kind of maf'ul mutlaq is a bit of a tricky one because it doesn't look like the verb. It just has the meaning of the verb in that particular situation. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm just wondering how easy it is to identify that
Yeah, so what you're
are
basically
there
going to
any
go
other
through like
opportunities?
elimination. You're going to go through elimination and you're going to say, okay, this is not an object, right? Um, it's not an object. Okay, so maybe it's so what else could it be? Okay, it's not the object. Is it a hal? Well, the default of a hal is usually going to be an ism fa'al, ism maf'ul usually. Okay, so it can't be a hal, right? وقع نيابة عني, right? He signed for me. So it's not a maf'ul bihi. It is not istithna. Is it tamyiz? Tamyiz is kind of different. Tamyiz is like when you say things like izdada ilman, like he increased in terms of knowledge, right? So it's not really the same kind of thing. So it's not really tamyiz. Um, is it the reason why something happened? So it's not the reason why. Okay, so what is it then? Oh, it's what happened. So really, and this is the point of grammar, right? In English or in Dutch or in Arabic, like what's the point of grammar is دقة الفهم, like what are you actually saying? Right? Are you saying that that's the thing that happened to? Is that the reason? Is that the this? Is it the that? So no, the niyaba is the action that happened, right? The niyaba is actually the action that happened, right? This tawqi' in that time was an act of niyaba. So therefore, it's maf'ul mutlaq because maf'ul mutlaq means the action that actually happened. Does that make sense?
Yes, Sheikh.
Right? So, just going to answer that. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Okay, so now we're looking at this word like what is this? Like what actually happened? Okay, if that's what actually happened, then it's مفهوم مطلق, right? So ذكرت هذا ذكرت هذا تتمة للفائدة, right? I mentioned this تتمة. تتمة means to complete. للفائدة. So it's to complete the benefit, for the full benefit. I mentioned this for the full benefit. So you say تتمة للفائدة. تتمة. Like, so i.e., so does ذكر mean تتمة? Does mention mean to complete? No, it doesn't. Okay, did you mention a completion? Is that the object? No. Is it the reason why you did it? Ah, but that's not really a reason because the reason is usually going to be emotion. So that can't really be a reason. I guess you can indirectly make it a reason, possible. It's not tamyiz, it's not hal, it's not this. Again, it is what it was, i.e., when you mention that, this thing, your act of mentioning it in that scenario was an act of completing. So therefore, it's actually maf'ul mutlaq, right? Or we could describe it hal min al min al min al min al min al maf'ul mutlaq. Okay, you can kind of describe it as a similar kind of thing. When you say hal, because the hal is that thing, it's the same kind of thing. Does that make sense? So
Sheikh.
often it's gonna be a verbal noun as well, not always. So basically, sneaky maf'ul mutlaqs are gonna be adjectives describing, right, the maf'ul mutlaq, right? فَلْيَبْكُوا كَثِيرًا, let them cry much, i.e., let them cry بكاء كثيرا, right? Right. So كثيرا نادرا نادرا ما أراه, seldom indeed do I see him, i.e., رؤية نادرة أراه, right? It's describing the action itself. Okay. or you're going to see a verbal noun, and that verbal noun, at least in that situation, will have the same meaning as the verb. Okay. So هو المصدر المؤكد, right? لعامله, أي ذكر توكيدا لعامله, right? So it's to emphasize it. أو المبين لنوعه أو عدده أو لعدده, right? So it's either going to be like, mashallah, rakada rakad, mashallah, like he really ran, right? He really ran. Either وَنَزَّلْنَاهُ تَنزِيلًا, we really send it down, right? So that's for tawkid, i.e., there's no, it doesn't not mean that. Like, qatal, it's like, subhanallah, qatalahum, subhanallah, right? He actually killed them? No, Habibi, like, doesn't mean he actually killed them. But qatalhum, qatalahum qatlan, he literally killed them, right? So you might translate it with the word literally, or translate it as actually or really, right? That's often translation of that masdar. Or masha mashyan bati'an, he walked slowly, right? Or ra'ahu marrataini, he saw them twice, i.e. ra'ahu ru'yataini, he saw him two instances of seeing, right? بعدده. فالمؤكد لعامله نحو ضربت ضربا وأنا ضارب ضربا وعجبت من ضربك ضربا. فالمبين لنوعه نحو ضربت ضربا شديدا أو ضربت ضرب الأمير أو ضربت ذلك الضرب أو ضربت الضرب. والمبين لعدده نحو ضربت ضربة أو ضربتين أو ضربات. والثالث المفعول من أجله. It's also called المفعول له. Why? So here this is useful, right? Like I'm asking, so for example, يعملون, فليعمل عملا صالحا. Should he do good deeds? Are the good deeds the object or the good deeds the act itself? That's a useful question. Similarly here, are you saying what he did or why he did it? It's not the same, right? So it's not the same thing, right? So he says, وَالثَّالِثُ الْمَفْعُولِ لِأَجْلِهِ, the done for, the done on for the sake of. وهو المصدر المذكور, it's mentioned, علة, right? Or سببا. So علة is the reason why something happened, right? Sabab is the cause. What are you trying to achieve? Okay, علة, I was hungry, so I stood up, right? So the sabab, the cause, teaching you was the cause. I came to teach you, right? That's the one is علة. The علة comes before and the sabab comes afterwards. وهو المصدر المذكور علة لحدث, an event, شاركه في الزمان والفاعل. So when you, it has to be, it has to have the same time and the same act at the same person as the fa'il. So when you say قمت and then you mention this masdar, that masdar has to be undertaken by the person who's doing it. So here, قمت إجلالا للشيخ, I stood up to respect the sheikh, i.e., I was the one who was standing, and I was the one who's doing the ijlal. Does that make sense? But it can't not have the same person. Well, that wouldn't make any sense. وضربت بابني تأديبا, right? So here, تأديب, I can also make it مطلق. So are you trying to say why you struck or what kind of strike you did? Does that make sense? So I struck him ضرب تأديب. I struck him a striking of teaching, right? Or is that why? Can you see the difference? Like, what was the motive in order to teach him a lesson? What you did, oh, تأديب. So that's not the same thing. So grammatically, you can analyze it as A and B, but it doesn't mean the same thing. One is I did it in order to do this, or I'm saying how I did it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. وقصدتك ابتغاء معروفك, right? So here, and maybe Muhammad, I mean, you can look into the Hawashi and look into the Shuruh a bit more.
Uh,
1 second, please. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. So they're not the same thing. So there's a condition that's debated is it a condition that all maf'ul min ajlis have to be emotions? If that's the case, then if you said something like ta'deeb is not an emotion. So in which case there's a taqdeer ضربت ابني إرادة تأديبه, right? وقصدتك ابتغاء معروفك. Does that make sense? But if you say that's not a condition, right, then it's fine, right? تأديبا, that was the reason why I did it, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Similarly, يريكم البرق خوفا. يريكم البرق خوفا. What is the problem here? So it said شاركه في الزمان والمكان. So Allah makes you see the lightning خوفا. When Allah is making you see the so when Allah is making you see the lightning, is he scared of the lightning? No, hashahu, right? Allah is not scared of anything. So how do we describe that? Right? يريكم البرق خوفا وطمعا. So he makes you see the lightning and you're scared because of the lightning, but you're also hopeful because it might rain and you're gonna have crops and grass. So how do we describe that? Right? So maybe Muhammad Amin, you can look that up. Look it up in Durr al-Masun by Samin al-Halabi. يريكم البرق خوفا وطمعا. Right? What is that? Because if you have to have ittihad al-fa'il, the one who is doing the action also has to undertake that masdar. Allah is not scared, so how do we describe that? Or can we break the word yurikum into two actions? i.e., وهو الذي يجعلكم ترون البرق وأنتم خائفين, right? وأنتم خائفون وأنتم طامعون فيه. Does that make sense? So maybe we can look at the verb as in two things. So it's true that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not scared, hashahu, but it means that, but then how is it ittihad al-fa'il? right? Does it make sense? So there's two questions. Ittihad al-fa'il sometimes is a bit confusing. And number two, does it always have to be an emotion, right? Does it have to be, what's it called, what those term they use? Min a'mal al-qulub, right? Like khawf, raja, ihtiram, right? So ijlal is something of the heart, but for example here, ta'deeb is not of the heart, right? Ibtigha is part of the heart, right? Does that make sense, inshallah?
Yes.
Okay, so Muhammad Amin said, look up that one. And also look up Sibghat Allah, right? Sibghat Allah. What is the i'rab of Sibghat Allah? وَمَنْ أَحْسَنَ اللَّهِ سِبْغَةً. Not what وَمَنْ أَحْسَنَ اللَّهِ سِبْغَةً, that's easy. That's tamyiz. But when you say Sibghat Allah, why does it have a fath? Right? What's going on? Right? And similarly, جزاء وفاقا in Surah Naba, right? جزاء وفاقا. What is the i'rab of that? Right? Look up in Samin al-Halabi, Ad-Dur al-Masun. They're going to give you different opinions, but can that be a maf'ul mutlaq? Or can that be a maf'ul min ajlihi? How does it work? Right. Okay, so now we're on to the maf'ul fihi, which is called the dharf, right? وهو المسمى ظرفا عند البصريين, right? And it's called something else for the Kufiyun. It's called something like um can't what it's called. The Basri, but the Kufiyun call it something else. So we have to understand that basically there were these two schools, right? Like imagine, for example, there's a Hanbali school and a Shafi'i school, okay? We're quite similar. There's a number of similarities, okay, but we're not the same. So imagine if over time they merge into one madhab, right? Where there are some things in that madhab that are Hanbali, but majority of it is Shafi'i. Like that's what happened with Nahu, right? There are two different madhabs, right, with different usul and different terminology, but they became one, right? That's what kind of happened. That's a kind of an interesting thing in the evolution of the civilization of Islam. Usually things don't happen like that. Usually they get bifurcation, right? In animals, right? In sciences, right? The social sciences break into different sciences and different specializations, usually, right? Things like that happen, right? Things don't merge, they don't converge, they are separate things. So, Hanbali is not the same as Shafi'i, they don't actually converge. The Basrans is not the same as the Kufans, they don't converge, but that's what happened. Is that a sign of weakness of the civilization? Right, that it was like that, or is it something else? Allahu A'lam. It's an interesting issue. Excuse me. But anyway, the Bastarans basically took over. Right. وهو ما ضمن معنى في من اسم زمان مطلقا أو اسم مكان مبهم. Okay. So basically we have a place or a time this action happened in. So where or when did the action happen, right? So if we go through the maf'uls, if I say what happened, the maf'ul mutlaq answers that question. Why did it happen? The maf'ul min ajlihi answers that question. What did it happen to? The maf'ul, the done to, answer that question, right? Okay. So, so that makes sense. And then we have what? And then ask how. There's two answers for that. How was the person when the action happened? That's called the hal. How was the action done, or what was the action itself? That's maf'ul mutlaq. So the answer, when you ask the question kayf, you use two things for that. The hal to describe the things, and to describe actions, you use the maf'ul mutlaq. Okay, and then we use darf is where and when. Okay, that's called the darf, right? In Dutch, do they have different cases, or that doesn't exist anymore in Dutch?
Not anymore, only as artifact.
Right. But whereas in German, right? In German, you're gonna have like, what is it you say like the bird came off the tree and the bird is on the tree. It's not the same. Like when it's an object of what happened to the tree is one thing, but coming like where it happened is something else, right? And so these words, it has different grammar, right? This is what it is in Arabic, I'm pretty sure it exists in Latin. والله أعلم. Anyway, so الرابع المفعول فيه من الظرف وهو المسمى الظرف. It's called the container. ظرف means a container, right? عند البصريين وهو ما ضمن معنى في من اسم زمان مطلقا, right? So any time, whether it's specific or not specific, it doesn't matter, right? So you can use a specific time as a ظرف, right? And you can use a general time as a ظرف. It's fine, right? أو اسم مكان مبهم. With اسم مكان, you can't do that. You cannot use a ظرف صريح that is مختص. You can't do that. It has specific limits. Like you can't say, for example, صليت البيت. I prayed in the house. You can't do that. You could say صليت أمام البيت. That's fine. In front of the house. The word in front does not have distinguished limits, fixed limits, right? So but you can say something like أمام البيت, خلف البيت, right? تحت السقف, right? That's fine. So a ظرف مكان is fine if it's مبهم, if it's like general. ظرف زمان مطلقا is fine. نحو صمت يوما, that's fine. أو يوما طويلا, that's fine. Or يوم الخميس, that's fine. Or اليوم, today. Or أسبوعا, that's fine. You can be specific or you can be general. والمكان المبهم نحو جلست خلف زيد أو فوقه أو تحته وما أشبه ذلك من أسماء الجهات والمقادير كسرت ميلا. So even سرت ميلا, it's مختص in that it's a specific distance, but you don't know where, in which direction. So it's vague, it's مبهم in which direction you went. وما صيغ من الفعل كرميت مرمى زيد. I shot where Zaid shot, right? So that's specific and it was the same place, but it's general in the phrase. Go ahead, Muhammad.
Wouldn't سرت ميلا be مفعول مطلق?
No. You could make it مفعول مطلق, right? You could do that, right? سافر سفر قصر, right? He traveled a traveling that would allow him to shorten, right? So that's what he did, right? سافر مسافة قصر. That's how far he went. So you can, right? So you could, right? So it's depending how you look at it. But سرت ميلا, right? That could be also مفعول مطلق. You can make it مفعول مطلق, yeah. But by default, it's a ظرف. Does that make sense?
Not really, not sure.
So it's
The way I'm understanding مفعول
because what you're trying to
فيه.
say is like you traveled the traveling of a mile, right? Like that's what you did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but what it's saying is looking not what you did, but from like how far did you do that?
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's still considered how far you did it, right? The distance. سرت ميلا. Yeah. But it's close, right? Because a lot of these things they're all very, very close. So you could make it like you could make it a مفعول مطلق as well.
Yeah, I meant to
Like
ask this last
like
class, but
you
I
could say
forgot.
سرت سيرا كان مسافته ميلا. So it's almost the same. So many of them are like almost the same, right?
Yeah.
Like so it's like it's very hard to like the difference. Like ما شاء الله تتكلم كثيرا. So what does that mean? It means do you say a lot of words or do you do the action of speaking a lot? It's like, well, it's not really any different, you know? So like, is that مفعول مطلق or is that مفعول به? Or يعمل عملا صالحا مفعول به or مفعول مطلق? It's like, well, I mean, they're so close, right? There's like hardly any difference whatsoever.
Yeah.
Did you want to ask something else?
I meant to ask this last class, but I forgot. So when we have when we're in situations like this where Nahu just says, yeah, you can take whichever i'rab you want. Is there an outside uh,
Yeah, so the point is
reason to pick one over the other?
al-i'rab far'un ma'na. This is a problem. So here's a problem. You will find situations sometimes where the i'rab is merely a label but doesn't reflect the meaning. You know what I'm
Mm,
saying? So
yeah.
um so it's just like, okay, we've solved it now. There we go. And it's like, yeah, but that's not really. It's like coding, right? Like you could code this thing, right? I want this page to do this, right? But like there's effective ways of doing it that reflect the usage of the person who's going to use it, right? It's user friendly, and there's a way that doesn't do that. But they're all solutions, right? So it's like, oh, we have a solution, there we go. But that's not a very good solution. So you will find that sometimes where it doesn't really make sense. And that's why sometimes, for example, my teacher, Sheikh Ali Hani, he said, like in tafsir, we're often going to use the word like the Basrans will have an analysis. It is a valid analysis, but just doesn't really reflect the meaning very well. Whereas the Kufans actually have something that reflects the meaning better, right? Um, so I give an example of that is so what is it? Mm, I'm trying to think right now. One second. Yeah. So it's the other way around here, but like for example, the Kufans, they have something called mansub al-qata', right? Mansub al-qata' is where you have a word is describing the previous word, okay? This word describes the previous word. The previous word is definite, okay? And the second word is not definite. It's indefinite. So by default, a indefinite word cannot describe a definite word, right? It has to be the same. So what happens then is the Kufans will say something like this, right? Like Ja'a Zaydun Bakiyan. And they say, well, it was originally this. Ja'a Zaydun al-Baki. The crying Zayd came. You cut off the L, okay, and then you made it mansub. So then it became Ja'a Zaydun Bakiyan, right? So does the crying Zayd mean the same thing as Zayd came while crying? And they're like, yeah. So you see, they have an analysis, which is like, okay, but that's not really the same thing, though, is it? But other times it is. Like other times it actually feel like it's basically exactly the same. So, so what they do is there's these two things. There's meanings and there's grammar. They're not actually the same thing, and they try and put the two together. But sometimes it ends up like not really meaning anything, right? So when you say, for example, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, okay, khalas, it's atf bayan or badal or na'at. I say, well, what do you mean though? Do you mean in the name of the merciful Allah? Do you mean in the name of Allah, the most merciful, or do you mean of Allah, the most merciful? Right? What are you actually trying to say? Right? So the grammatical analysis then has to be tied to the meaning. And the meaning has to be tied to the greater meaning of balagha, like balaghatan, what are you trying to say? Right? I'll give you another example. إذا الشمس كورت, right? إذا الشمس كورت. So the Basrans come along and they say you cannot have a jumla ismiya. You cannot have a jumla ismiya as the shart. You cannot say إذا زيد حضر. You have to say إذا حضر زيد. Okay, so then we say, well, here we go. إذا الشمس كورت. That's what you have. So they say, there's an implied verb. Okay, what's the implied verb? إذا كورت الشمس كورت. So that's their grammatical analysis, that you couldn't have, it can't be a jumla ismiya, so therefore there has to be an implied verb. إذا كورت الأرض إذا الشمس كورت, so إذا كورت الشمس كورت. So now basically, the verse used to begin with the sun, when the sun, right? When the sun, right? The emphasis was on the sun. Now suddenly, it's now because of the dictates of grammar, suddenly the emphasis is the verb. The verb is mentioned twice. So now, so that's kind of different. So you've changed the rhetoric based on your artificial grammatical needs, right? Is that valid? The answer is no, right? So the Kufans, they say it's fine, you can say that. وَإِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ, it's not a problem. And so it's now a Jumla Ismiya, and that's it. End of story. Right? And, there we go. So we have to start with the meaning. You see different sounds, and you see the different sounds have meanings. You try and add them up, and then you try and create a structure, right? That's what we do in grammar. Like, there's these changes, here's these meanings. What is being said here? But sometimes it's kind of artificial, like we don't really know what's going on, or it doesn't really reflect the meaning in the ultimate sense. You following me?
Yes.
Right?
Uh,
For example, you have a shop, for example, called Muhammad Amin lil right? So I'm going to say, what's the i'rab of lil Say, well, jar majrur after ma'rifah is a hal. So say, okay, Muhammad Amin ka'inan lil like Muhammad Amin while it is being for electricity. Like, that's what it means, right? It doesn't mean that. Say, no, but it's a hal, khalas. Like you've solved it in a way that makes grammatical sense, but that's not what it means. It doesn't mean, that's weird. That's like you know, you say, for example, here's a picture. So here I did a funny picture of you, okay? And we're like, what's that? Oh, this is Muhammad Amin on holiday. Haha, right? Like, here's a picture, like, that's Muhammad Amin while he's on holiday. It's a hal, right? Muhammad Amin on holiday, it's a hal, right? Here's a picture of Muhammad Amin. It's like, haha, his little kid. It's like, who's that? Oh, Muhammad Amin at age 3, right? That's a hal. Muhammad Amin حال كونه the right في السن الثلاث, right? In that state. That's what it is. A picture in that state. That's a hal. Whereas Muhammad Amin al-Kahraba is not a hal, but we analyze it as a hal because جار مجرور بعد معرفة حال خلاص. That's how we analyze it. Does that make sense?
yes. Barakallah.
So that there's these issues and we have to kind of tie the two together. Right? خير. والخامس المفعول معه, which is very, very rare, right? وهو الاسم الفضلة الواقع بعد واو المصاحبة المسبوقة بفعل أو نحو جاء الأمير والجيشة أو باسم فيه معنى فعل وحروفه نحو أنا سائر والنيلة. Right? It's very rare. So what is the point of مفعول معه is التنصيص على المعية. Right? So جاء الأمير والجيش means they both came. Did they both come in the same millennium? Not necessarily. Right? So the wow, the ظاهر of the wow is معية, but that's not a nas of معية. Right? Do you know what I mean by ظاهر and nas? Right? In usul fiqh, ظاهر, that's what you'd assume, but it's not necessarily the case. Versus nas, that is the case. Right? So nas لا يحتمل التأويل, ظاهر يحتمل التأويل. Right? يحتمل معنيين فأكثر أحدها أرجح من الأخرى. Right? Right? That's the ظاهر. Right? So the ظاهر is that the army came along with him. But if you want to do tansis, you say جاء الأمير والجيش. Right? أنا سائر والنيل. I'm traveling along with the Nile. I'm traveling along. I will travel along with the Nile. والسادس خبر كان وأخواتها نحو كان زيد قائما. We did that already. والسابع اسم إن وأخواتها نحو إن زيد قائم. وتقدما في المرفوعات. الثامن الحال وهو الوصف الفضلة is extra المبين لهيئة صاحبه فاعلا كان نحو جاء زيد راكبا أو مفعولا نحو ركبت الفرس مسرجا. Whoops. أو مجرورا بالحرف نحو مررت بهند جالسة أو مجرورا بالمضاف نحو إليه مرجعكم جميعا all of you. وتنقسم الحال إلى منتقلة كما مثلنا. وإلى لازمة نحو دعوت الله سميعا. وإلى موطئة وهي الجامد الموصوف بمشتق نحو فتمثل لها بشرا سويا. وإلى مقارنة في الزمان نحو هذا بعلي شيخا. وإلى مقدرة وهي المستقبل نحو ادخلوها خالدين. وإلى محكية نحو جاء زيد أمسي راكبا. ومفردة كما تقدم. ومتعددة لمتعدد نحو لقيته مصعدا منحدرا ويقدر أو Okay, so these are basically different اعتبارات of the حال. So the main thing is it's describing a thing. It's not describing the process. مفعول مطلق describes the process, right? جاء زيد سريعا. He came quickly. أي جاء زيد مجيئا سريعا. He came and the action was done quickly. Versus جاء زيد سريعا, he was quick, right? So that's why you say مسرعا, he came quickly. Or بسرعة, right? So بسرعة is مفعول مطلق. أي جاء زيد مجيئا موصوف بالسرعة. Okay, that's يلا يلا بسرعة. That's مفعول مطلق, quickly. I'm not describing you, I'm describing the action, right? But جاء زيد بأدب, right? He came with a lot of adab, right? مصحوبا بأدب. Okay, so there's different things, different. You're describing him or you're describing the action. If you're describing the action, مفعول مطلق. You're describing him, the حال. فاعل كان نحو جاء زين راكبا, easy. مفعولا نحو ركبت الفرس مسرجا, with the saddle on, مجرورا with that. Okay, so then it goes on to these other types of حال. So it says وتنقسم الحال إلى منتقلة, right? That's the default of the حال, is it's just a temporary thing, right? كما مثلنا. وإلى لازمة, right? So حال لازمة is a bit of a tricky thing, because you say حال means something temporary, but then it's suddenly permanent, right? So دعوت الله السميع. دعوت الله سميعا, right? So how do the Kufans analyze it? They say منصوب على القطع, right? دعي الله سميعا. دعي الله السميع. So you'd say the all-hearing Allah was called upon. دعي الله السميع. And then Allah was called upon when he could hear. I mean, he could always hear. So what does it mean? Right, what it means is if from that point of view. Okay, so da'awtullah, it doesn't mean when he could hear, because he could always hear. But it means from that angle, right? Da'awtullah bi'atibarihi sami'an, right? From that point of view. That's why I did it, right? So, right. خلق الإنسان ضعيفا. Man was created weak versus خلق الإنسان الضعيف. The weak man was created. They're quite different, right? Man was created weak versus the weak man was created. So one is a sifa, one's a hal. That's not the same. So it's not really different. So one is متنقلة or منتقلة, and the other one is ثابتة, right? Hal lazima, right? So a hal is not really a temporary state. Slightly different, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right. وإلى موطئة وهي الجامدة الموصوفة بمشتق نحو فتمثل لها بشرا سويا. And so he appeared to her as a handsome man or a leveled man, right? So basharan, right? That's jamid, right? So why is it called muwatti'ah? So the default with the ha, like the na'at, it should be mushtaq. But here it's not mushtaq, but it's leading up to the mushtaq. Does that make sense? So tawti'ah is to introduce something. It's there to introduce the word sawiyya. You can't just say فَتَمَثَّلَهَا سَوِيًّا. وإلى مقارنة, right, and مستقبلة, right, وإلى مقدرة, right. So something that is actually current. نحو هذا بعلي شيخا. Here is my husband being an old man. وإلى مقدرة theoretical, يعني وهي المستقبلة. نحو ادخلوها خالدين, right. So enter it, not immortally. Like, how can you enter it immortally? What it means is enter it, and then once you're in there, you will never die, right? So it's still also hal, even though it's not hal, right? Hal usually means now. وإلى محكية, right? So again, so a lot of these things are just basically tricks of the mind, right? Like we do a lot of kind of tricks of the mind. We think about things in certain ways, right? So from this point of view, that point of view, we do a lot of these things in linguistics, right? So here it's like it's quoted. نحو جاء زيد أمسي راكبا. Zayd came yesterday while riding, right? And it could be mufrad, i.e. not a sentence, كما تقدم. ومتعدد could be many. نحو لقيته مصعدا منحدرا. I met him going up and down, right? So they're obviously implied words there. ومتعددة لواحد مع الترادف أو التداخل. نحو جاء زيد راكبا متبسما. It's fine. وقد تأتي الحال مؤكدة لعاملها. نحو فتبسم ضاحكا. That's مؤكدة, right? نحو لآمن من في الأرض كلهم جميعا. also حال. ومؤكدة لمضمون جملة قبلها. نحو زيد أبوك عطوفا, right? So that's so عطوف is not saying like while he, like Zayd is your father. It's very similar. So مؤكدة لمضمون جملة is very similar to لازمة, right? So Zayd is your father being kind, right? فعول, being kind, right? I.e. it's not just, but it's a kind of a paraphrasing of the fact that he's your father from that point of view. Okay. But the most important things to have is متنقلة and لازمة, right? كفى بالله وكيلا. So Allah is enough only when He's a wakil. Well, Allah is always a wakil. So how is that a hal? And if it isn't a hal, is it a tamiz? Right. So again, that's another one to look up. Muhammad Amin. كفى بالله وكيلا. Is that a hal or is that a tamiz? Right. And if it's a hal, is it a temporary thing? Is it hal muntaqila or is it hal lazima? Right. كفى بالله شهيدا. Same discussion. Right. And just a side note, usually what's going to happen is in books of tafsir or nahu, the first time a particular grammatical problem comes up, it will be mentioned. Thereafter, it will not be mentioned. So كفى بالله وكيلا, كفى بالله شهيدا. Whichever will become first, they'll analyze it, talk about it, and leave it. And so that's why traditionally many people they just do tafsir of Surah Al-Baqarah. It's long enough in a short-term learning system. So you like Baydawi of Baqarah, and that's it. Why? Because I can't do the whole thing. And I've seen all the major discussions that to do with kalam, to do with fiqh, to do with everything else, right? And I can kind of work out the rest by myself. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so what do you have today, Muhammad? You've got كفى بالله وكيلا, كفى بالله شهيدا. You've got صبغة Allah. You've got what else?
يريكم برق خوفا وطمعا.
Right? So the two questions: does it have to be an emotion, and what about ittihad al-fa'il? Do they have to be the same fa'il? And then we mentioned something else as well. It also
جزاء وفاقا.
جزاء وفاقا. Is that مفعول مطلق? Is that مفعول من أجله? If it's مفعول مطلق, how does it work out, etc. صبغة Allah, we mentioned that as well. صبغة Allah. I'm sure there's some others, but manage. Shall I stop here? Shall I? صلى الله عليه وسلم محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.